I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about the trends in sustainable purchasing that provide both opportunities and challenges for driving the market for soy-based industrial products. I think some of the things I'm going to talk about touch on some themes or some observations that we've heard from previous speakers, and hopefully I'll be able to tie some of that together in this presentation. Market drivers in the sustainability area. I think you've heard from the previous speakers that we have a variety of things that are creating opportunities because of interest in purchasing more sustainable products. From federal and state purchasing laws, where there are direct opportunities like the Bio-Preferred program that's a driver. Some states have adopted bio-based purchasing programs as well. But indirectly, even under the broad mandate of green or more sustainable purchasing, the attributes of bio-based products, low VOC, low toxicity, those attributes play into the broader sustainable purchasing drivers. Institutional purchasers, another opportunity, particularly universities, we have been finding. A lot of them have adopted sustainable purchasing policies and goals. They're very interested in buying more green products, and often bio-based is on the list of things they consider green for those programs. Individual companies, we've heard particularly publicly traded companies, multinational companies that understand and have sustainability programs and goals, and part of that is they want to get more sustainable materials. We heard that from Ford and Goodyear today, and sell more sustainable products. So the corporate interest in sustainability is also growing. And then finally, sort of overarching, are international goals that have come about for more sustainable development, responsible consumption and production, and that's part of the UN sustainability goals. And that talks about having more environmentally sound chemicals, reducing waste, reducing air and water and soil pollution. So all of these sort of seed the ground, if you will, for potential markets to increase the use of bio-based products in the sustainability field. With the drivers, however, come some challenges. Some of them were mentioned here today. Obviously, first and foremost, the products have to perform the same or better. That's a given. So we're looking at performance plus. That gets us into some of the availability and cost issues that were talked about. So great to have a sustainable green product. If it's not available in the quantities that people need to consume, or it's available at a first cost or a price that's higher than what they're used to paying for, that creates an obstacle for people saying, well, I'd like to buy green. Somebody said up here, it's in my heart, but if it costs a few pennies more, it's not in my pocketbook. The first cost versus life cycle, and again, that was touched upon, there are some entities who will look at the life cycle costs of a product and be willing to pay a higher initial price. But that's a really tough business case to make, and not everybody is open to that, has the time or the interest in making that. It's something I think people should make when they have a higher first cost product, first cost of the product, but it's going to be a tough sell. Even in the sustainability world where people say, oh, I want the better product, but my budget doesn't provide for it. And oftentimes, and I think DOD is a good example, you have stovepipe budgets. So the person who's buying it isn't necessarily the person who's paying for the use costs or the disposal costs or the fact that it might extend equipment life. That's in somebody else's budget. And so they say, what's in my budget, I control. I don't care that it's going to save this guy over here money, because that's not what I'm being measured on spending my budget. So some of the benefits, sustainability has, those who are familiar with it, it's sort of the triple bottom line, environment, social, and economic. The environmental dimensions of sustainability are far better defined, I believe, than the social and economic benefits. That's sort of, it's part of the triple bottom line, but people who are talking about green purchasing often are focusing on the environmental parts. It's really the very much more sophisticated buyers who are now looking at the social and economic. But some of the examples, and they're things that the bio-based products can help, are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing energy use, worker and end consumer exposures to toxic chemicals or raw materials that are toxic. The use of using less non-renewable resources, water reduction. I think that was mentioned a couple of times. That is a big factor that's becoming more and more recognized. In addition to climate change, is water, and those two things are often related. Some of the other increasing and reducing land use impacts. That's one that affects particularly soy crops. When people look at, well, is it sustainable? What are you doing in terms of land use impacts? Harmful air emissions, trying to lower those as a sustainability benefit, and reducing waste. It gets to the circular economy that people were talking about. The cradle to cradle is the sort of the new look of life cycle. You're looking at everything all around. Again, the social dimensions still not quite as well defined, but they include things like child labor, worker rights, wages that are considered social equity factors. I think companies that are working in the international space in particular are finding those social aspects of sustainability something that they are being asked about. And then on the economic dimension, things like supporting local economies. This is where I would argue the rural economy and the support bio-based for the rural economy should be looked at as part of the economics side of sustainability. Supplier diversity, small businesses, hub zones. If you're not talking about rural areas, you might be talking about urban areas. Open bidding process, the ability of smaller companies to get into the process, can all be considered part of that economic sustainable bottom line. But again, I think right now the market is there's a lot of focus and on the environmental benefits, and that leads to what do we need to know in the bio-based space about the various sustainability factors and how they play out in individual marketplaces, and what can be done to take advantage of those. And currently, what I think we're seeing is you can't just be bio-based. Even if in this sustainability world, people think of, and there needs to be more education on this, bio-based is a single attribute. And we often run into in the soy world, well, but bio-based from soy means you come from farmers and it's the GMOs and you're using up the land and you got fertilizer and water use. And so just saying you're bio-based, or in fact having a bio-preferred label, still some people will say, well, we're not sure that's sustainable. The other is the greenwashing. Someone had mentioned this. Everybody's putting on little labels or little checks or little things saying we're green, we're great, we do all of this. And the Federal Trade Commission has a rule on environmental claims. The people have violated those rules. Others just ignore it. But it makes, I think, the end-use purchaser a little suspect when everybody is making these green claims. They say, well, how do we know that's the case? And that's why what we're seeing in the sort of trend of what I want to be talking about in this presentation is the growth in eco-labels and standards and life cycle assessments and environmental product declarations, where buyers can say, don't just tell me you're green, show me you're green. Do you have a green label? Do you meet a green standard? Have you done a life cycle assessment? Have you done an environmental product declaration? So I think it's a mixed bag, because people who don't care about green don't care about these labels. The people who do care about sustainability, some of these labels can become, the perfect being the enemy of the good. You must have all of these labels, and biopreferred isn't good enough because it's a single attribute. And what else do you have? And so somewhere in between the purists and the people who don't care, there's a very broad group of end users. But I think as Shanna was pointing out at the end, this cooperation between people who are setting policies for buying green products or sustainable products and the folks who are actually buying those products, there needs to be a communication there. And one of the things about people who are buying products is just we talked about lists before, but they want lists. Just tell me what to buy. Tell me to look for these things with the bio-preferred label, or tell me to look for the things that have a green seal label, or just tell me that, give me a list, and then I'll know what to buy. But when you tell me to buy things that are more sustainable and you don't give me any guidance, I'm a purchaser, I'm going to ignore it, which is a lot of what is happening now. So the types of labels that have come to be, some of them, the government labels, I think, are much more respected. There was a discussion of the organic label and how we could make biopreferred have the knowledge that people have when they go in and look at USDA organic. There's EPA Safer Choice label, which is for safer chemicals. And USB had a particular project several years ago where they were able to get methyl soyate, which is used in biodiesel, but it's also a major solvent in a lot of different products. And I didn't know, Ed, that it was the main ingredient in the concrete sealer. That is now on the green list of products that EPA that has approved as safer choice products, which means that anybody who is making a product with that as an ingredient and doesn't have any other bad stuff in their products can go to EPA and get the EPA Safer Choice label. And that is a label that, because it's a government label, does have a lot of validity. So getting more bio-based products to also perhaps have the Safer Choice label would be a good thing. The other EPA has, and there was some discussion of this, a recycled content program. So that's another standard, and it's not exactly a label, but it's a standard where people can get listed and say, I meet the federal requirements for recycled content. Sometimes there's a clash between biopreferred and CPG products if they're in the same category. The law says technically you have to give preference to the recycled product over the bio-based product. However, as a matter of reality, I don't think those conflicts are occurring that much, and you can certainly combine. You can have a carpet that has a recycled face and a bio-based backing. The motor oil that we were talking about earlier, there's a re-refined motor oil, but I don't believe there's enough re-refined motor oil in the country to serve all the federal agencies, so the opportunity to use a bio-based engine oil is there. In the lubricant space, the other government standard that's well respected is the environmentally acceptable lubricant standard. It was originally done for boats, for discharges from boats, but it basically allows you to qualify any lubricant product as being biodegradable, non-toxic, or minimally toxic. And even if it's not being used in a marine setting, I think it's a label that would help people in the lubricant space to say, hey, we have this environmentally preferable product. The other big push for these multi-attribute labels, where things are looked at more over life cycle. So some of the agencies, Underwriters Lab, which you might be familiar with for the kind of technical standards they do, has a group called UL Environment, and they do a series of eco-labels. One is called the eco-label, but they also do verifications of claims for individual kinds of labels. So if you want to go in and document your carbon reduction or your water use, they have labels for that and verification. There's a Cradle to Cradle, people who are in the architecture field probably are aware of this. This is a group that looks at building products is where they started. Circular economy, again, have a series of criteria rating from 1 to 5 how good your product is, and you get the Cradle to Cradle label. A lot of these are then picked up by things like the LEED Building Council refers to some of these. Green Circle is another group. I think DOD had initially done some work with Green Circle. They too will certify a series of environmental attributes. So what this means is you get this third-party verification, and when you're going out to the sellers, to the buyers, you say, hey, we just didn't make this up. We had a third party and we have this label and certification. And in theory, people in government agencies can be told, and they are told, here are the acceptable labels. There are others, sort of single attributes, but they're considered the gold star, things that, like low VOC for people in the carpet world. Those are important California standards, and also formaldehyde-free for the wood panels that are made by Columbia Forest Products. Meeting those standards, that's a way to get LEED points as well. Third-party ingredient, there was a mention of this. These are more disclosure requirements. So there is a group called Declare. There's also UL has started something called UL Product Lenses, and there's another group called Green Screen. And the idea here is that people will have all of the ingredients in their products looked at based on these different standards and be able to say, I have nothing on the Declare Red list, or I have nothing of the Green Screen products. This is a hazard-based, I got bad chemicals. It doesn't deal with exposure, but it says, hey, I got bad chemicals in here. So those are also being used as screening techniques. The nice thing about the new UL product lens is it's going to look at exposure too, because sometimes you can have a hazardous component, but there really isn't any exposure. So it's trying to be a little more sophisticated in doing risk. But again, when we're replacing this with bio-based products, bio-based feedstocks that are not on any of these lists, people can get cleared through Declare or the Green Screen that their products don't have any bad ingredients in them. Finally, there are a couple of industry standards. In general, the buyers are suspicious of industry standards, but there are several industries, the furniture industry through BFMI and the Forest Stewardship Council, that have really made their labels accepted in the sustainable purchasing world. They've worked very hard at this. They're at the table for all of the groups that are doing things. They're incorporated in LEED. And so you can have an industry-based standard, but it really needs to be one that's worked through the system. Another one for the carpet industry is they have an NSF standard, which has been recognized, and that's a case, again, where the industry worked with a lot of players in a more consensus standard way to get an acceptable eco-label. EPA, based on authority they had under executive orders, previous executive orders, have created a list of eco-labels and standards that they are telling the federal buyers are the ones they should use. They have a hierarchy. The hierarchy starts with the statutory standards, of which BioPreferred is one. CPG is another, Energy Star is another. So they'll say to federal buyers, here's our recommendation for what standards and labels you should be looking for when you buy products. They then go into some of these third-party labels, and they've assessed them on several different criteria and decided which ones they feel are acceptable and which ones they don't. They've done this for several different categories of products now. They've done it for carpet. They've done it for, trying to remember what else they did it for. They did it for carpet, cleaning products, and no, they haven't done that for coatings yet. For the recommendations were insulation. I'm sorry. So insulation, cleaning products, and carpet. EPA has decided which of these labels they think are good labels and communicated that to federal agencies. Don't know if the federal agencies are listening, but the other area that in sustainability where purchasers are looking is, do you have a life cycle assessment? Life cycle assessments can be done for several reasons. There were discussions here today about life cycle. Sometimes they're actually done as a benchmarking and continuous improvement. So you look at your product line. I think some of what Ford is doing is in that area. Here's a life cycle. Does this other product have a better life cycle? How do we continue to improve the life cycle? Or it can be done to show your customers that you have sustainable products, or at least that you've looked at the life cycle impacts. One of the problems with life cycle is each life cycle can be done differently with different boundaries and still meet the international, the ISO standards for what an acceptable life cycle is, but you can't compare them to each other. So one of the things that has happened in the international space, again, the ISO standards are to create something called environmental product declarations, which are actually life cycle assessments, but they're set up under the same rules. So there's a thing called category product rules. So if you're going to do a life cycle assessment for a certain type of product, it has to be done in accordance with those standards so people can compare. The tire industry, actually, Bob, just got a product category rule for tires. Goodyear and several others were part of a group to get that. So now every tire company can use that product category rule to do their own life cycle assessments. There's one in the carpet area that has been done, and several carpet companies, Maslin, I think, Shaw, for some of their carpets have done EPDs. You have to have this product category first. The insulation, for the insulation manufacturers, there is a product category, and there is an EPD, which was done for the whole industry, because you can do them for individual products or you can do them for the whole industry. I point out to Demilak that the one that was done for spray foam was done for the whole industry. And if you look at it, it says, well, some people actually use vegetable oils, but we did this disclosure based on petroleum. So it seems to me that it would create an opportunity to look at an individual product beyond the spray foam total category and say, hey, yeah, here's the EPD for our industry, but we have this product over here that's actually even better than what is in the EPD. So there are opportunities, and these are being asked for more and more, cross-referenced in other standards like LEED. The way people are now getting points under the LEED system, often LEED is saying, we'll give you points if you have an environmental product declaration, or you have a life cycle assessment, or you have one of these labels. And so LEED, as it goes now, it's into version 4.1, is relying much more on these kinds of labels and standards to get your points. And so that's another way the labels and standards are coming back for people in the building and construction industry to be important. The areas of in LEED where credits are available, and they're available for, we've looked at it for a variety of products that are made with bio-based, including insulation, the entry mats, the synthetic turf, carpeting, adhesives, paints, sealants, composite wood products. A lot of people in this room are making products that could get LEED points. But the LEED points now are a lot of them are going to be based on having these labels or meeting certain performance criteria, not just being bio-based. In fact, there's a history in LEED. When LEED was originally launched, there was a provision to get credit based on your bio-based content of the material that was being used. So the carpet or the insulation could get credit in between the version from 2009 and the version 4, which came out several years after that. They changed that credit, and that credit became, to meet the bio-based credit, you had to meet some South American agricultural standard that wasn't used in the U.S., that didn't mean anything. And so USB helped fund some efforts through contract work that we were doing to go to LEED and try to get that changed. Maybe substitute the U.S. soy sustainability protocol for this other standard. We were successful, and they didn't do it that way, but we are successful. Version 4.1 now has restored credits for bio-based based on bio-based content. And they haven't done it, they've done it in the new buildings and the commercial interiors, and they say they're going to do it for existing buildings. So we're back to also being able to get some credit for being bio-based based on the percent content. That would be in addition to whatever credits you can get under for having the labels or meeting VOC standards. So there's a little more room in LEED going forward. And this new version allows anybody who's in the middle of certifying a LEED project to use the new criteria. So for folks that are working in the LEED space, whether it's the wood panels or the carpet backing or the insulation, you might want to outreach and to the architects outreach that you can grab some new credits for bio-based again. Over my time here. Sustainability Leadership Purchasing Council is another group that has been very active. There are some carpet companies involved in that. There are some other big oil companies. But about a third of the membership are state and local governments and universities. And this is a space that, through USB funding, we've been able to participate to try to educate on bio-based. Because, quite frankly, the ideas that some of the people who were there had about bio-based products were very negative, particularly commodity products. So we were able to educate on things that USB had supported, like the life cycle assessment in 2010, the work in Field to Market, which is working on metrics for sustainable soy, and the U.S. Soybean Assurance Protocol to try to explain that there are metrics, that soy is sustainable, that the farmers are moving forward and making progress, and these are all things that USB had supported in an effort as if soy isn't considered sustainable, soy-based products are not going to be considered sustainable. So the first step is to continue to get that support for soy, and then in the life cycle work that was done in 2010, there was work that USB did on some of the intermediate products, like the polyols and the methyl soyate, to show that some of those feedstocks that were going into end-use products were also sustainable. And this is a group I would encourage some of the folks around the table to look at to see if you can participate, because the rule of thumb with all of these things is if you're not at the table, these are all considered consensus groups, and when they do things, they do put stuff out for comment, not just SPLC, but things like ASTM, where I know biodiesel industry has been very active. These are the folks that are writing the rules for what's sustainable and what's not, what labels are acceptable and what labels aren't. And being at the table, even though they're only consensus of the folks sitting at the table. And I would encourage USDA to be active in some of these things. LEED, for example, may need some education on bio-based. Work that had been done in the Sustainable Leadership Purchasing Council. GSA is still involved in that. DOD is still involved in that. But USDA had been initially, has not been recently, and EPA has not been recently. So that's an area where promotion of bio-based and education, I think, could be important. And It's a complicated world, is the bottom line, and you really need to look at your individual industries to decide what are the standards that are going to be important to the buyers in your industry, and how do you meet those, how do you potentially educate people on it, and hopefully, as there was the discussion about making the bio-preferred label even more prominent and making people understand that bio-based products, it's not a single attribute. While it's a single designation, there are a lot of other benefits that come along in the sustainability world with bio-based. So, sorry, went over my time. I started late.
Are there any questions for Sueanne?
Yeah.
Getting the late in the day,
No,
I guess.
Well, late in the day, and it's mind-numbing, and there's a lot there because there's a lot there. So,